people of the United Kingdom for the tragic loss of life in Manchester. What happened there and what has happened around the world is indescribable. It is painful. And that is precisely why, when anyone tells you that we cannot keep the transatlantic partnership together, they are dead wrong. We have to work together, not only to combat terrorism, but to combat climate change, to combat income, to combat oligarchy. Our job is to stand together as a civilized people, and that's what, Mr. Trump notwithstanding, we intend to do. And let me also be very clear that the views of the need to maintain the transatlantic partnership of the United States working with the UK, of the United States working with Europe, is not just my view. It is the view of the majority of the members of the U.S. Congress, and it is certainly the view of the overwhelming majority of the American people. Since the horrors of World War II, the relationship between the United States and Europe, and particularly between the U.S. and the United Kingdom, have been an essential one in promoting engagement, preventing conflict, and improving the standard of living of millions of people. In my opinion, and by the way, we just heard this news literally a few moments ago, the decision of President Trump to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, you got it, from the Paris Agreement on climate change is a decision which is short-sighted. It is extremely dangerous. When Trump said during the campaign, during his campaign, that climate change was a hoax, he was dead wrong. You know, and I know, that climate change is real. Climate change is caused by human activity, and climate change is already causing devastating harm throughout the United States and throughout the world. And I believe for the United States to withdraw from the Paris Agreement is not only going to endanger countries all over the world in terms of climate change, it is also an abdication of U.S. leadership in so many areas. So I want to assure you, and the need to combat climate change is a very clear example of the need for an international agreement and why the Paris Agreement is so important. The truth is that the United Kingdom alone is not going to stop the warming of the planet, or the floods, or droughts, or heat waves, or rising sea levels, or the acidification of the ocean that occurs with climate change. UK can't do it alone. China can't do it alone. Germany can't do it alone, and the United States can't do it alone. This is a crisis that begs and calls out for international cooperation if we are to leave our children and our grandchildren a planet that is healthy and that is habitable. And I also want you to know that despite Trump's absurd and unscientific views regarding climate change, please know that his views do not reflect the majority of the people in the United States. What we are seeing in the United States, despite Trump, is significant movement forward, not as fast as I would like, but significant movement forward in terms of energy conservation and in terms of moving away from fossil fuel into sustainable energies and energy efficiency. So despite what Trump may believe, despite Trump's view that he knows more than virtually the entire scientific community, the American people will move forward and do everything we can to combat the planetary crisis of climate change, and I wanted you to know that. Now, as I arrived here in Europe, there seems to be a question that is on everyone's mind, and that has to do with my thoughts and opinions about Donald Trump's presidency. So, in case you're interested, let me say a few words on that. It is no secret that for many, many reasons, let us say at the very least, I am not a great fan of Donald Trump. And let me just touch on, we can go on for many hours on this particular issue, but let me just give you a few examples of some of what the Trump administration is doing and why it must be opposed. First, what may or may not be of great interest to the people of the UK and Europe, but certainly is of great interest to the American people, is what Trump is doing in terms of domestic policy. And what he is doing there, and what he has done in the last month, is present a disastrous budget proposal. In fact, the most reactionary, obscene budget proposal that has ever been presented by a president in the modern history of the United States. And what that budget proposal is about is nothing less than a massive transfer of wealth from working families, from low-income people, from the children, from the elderly, from the sick and the poor, a massive transfer, unprecedented transfer of wealth from the people down below to the people on top. What Trump is proposing over a 10-year period is over $2.5 trillion in cuts to nutrition programs, cuts to housing, cuts to education, to health care, to the environment. And after he makes these massive cuts, life and death cuts, for some of the most vulnerable people in the country, in the same budget agreement, he provides $2.5 trillion in tax breaks for the top 1% in the midst of massive income and wealth inequality in the United States. So if you can imagine the obscenity of a budget that throws 23 million Americans off of health insurance, makes massive cuts to nutrition programs and other basic necessities, and then rewards the people on top after devastating the working class with a massive tax break. And what you will see in the United States, if I have anything to say about it, and I do, is people all over our country standing up and fighting back and telling Trump he is not going to devastate the working class of America while giving tax breaks to people who do not need it. And what is particularly obscene about his budget and his health care proposal is this was a man who ran for president telling the American people that he was on the side of the working class of the United States. Well, that turned out to be, as many other policies and statements from Mr. Trump are about, turned out to be a lie. This is a budget and a health care proposal from the billionaire class, which will represent only the interests of the billionaire class. Now, in addition to Trump's disastrous proposal on health care and the budget, I am very deeply concerned about his basic disrespect for democracy, for tolerance, and for other traditional American values and institutions. His unprecedented attack against the media is nothing less than an effort to intimidate those who would criticize him and to undermine respect for dissent and a free press. His attacks against the judiciary seek to diminish the separation of powers in the United States and to, again, intimidate those who would stand up against him. Further, the degree to which Trump tells blatant lies day after day after day is unprecedented for an American president, and his outrageous claim that some of you may have heard, that up to 5 million people voted illegally in the last election, is nothing more than an attempt to justify voter suppression and make it ultimately harder for people to vote, particularly people of color, low-income people, older people, and the youth. When he tells Republican governors all over this country that up to 5 million people voted illegally, what he is telling them is accelerate your efforts toward voter suppression. Make it harder. Put up obstacles in the way of poor people and people of color to vote. That is what that is about. And what I say to those people, and I say to any politician anywhere, if you don't have the guts to run on your ideas, if you can't go out to the people and ask them to vote for you because of what you believe in, if you are too cowardly to engage in a free and fair election, you should get the hell out of politics and get another job. It just so happens, and I'm not proud of this, but it just so happens that the United States of America has one of the lowest voter turnout rates of any major democratic country in the world. In the last election, actually, it was, for us, fairly high, 59 or 60% of the people voted. 2 years before that, we had 37% of the people voting in the midterm election, in which the entire House and a third of the Senate were up. Our job in America is to make it easier for people to participate in the political process, not harder. I also must tell you that I find it very strange that the President of the United States, a nation that has led the world in promoting democracy, seems to be more comfortable with autocrats and authoritarian politicians than with leaders of democratic nations. Frankly, many Americans, this is really true, they scratch their heads and they're wondering, how does it happen that President Trump has such an affinity, such a liking for Vladimir Putin, a man who has severely repressed democracy in his own country, has spent the last number of years trying to destabilize democracy in the United States, France, many other countries around the world, and is trying to weaken the transatlantic alliance. Why, in God's name, does Trump have such an affinity with such a leader? Further, I am personally outraged at Trump's effort to divide the American people up based on race, religion, and national origin. The role of the President of the United States, the role of any leader in any democratic society, must be to bring people together, to encourage tolerance and to encourage mutual respect. And when we talk about Trump's affinity for authoritarian leaders around the world, it's not just Putin. Americans are wondering why Trump has such kind words for President Duterte of the Philippines, who is seriously undermining civil rights and civil liberties in his own country, and why he seems so comfortable with the multi-billionaire leaders of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, as you know, is a hereditary monarchy, maybe secretly. That is what Trump is hoping for in the United States. A monarchy which treats women as third-class citizens and which promotes Wahhabism, a radical and extreme version of Islam that has spread throughout the Muslim world. Now, I am frequently asked how Trump won the presidential election. Good question. Now that you asked it, I'll try to answer it. But before I do, let me all remind you of something that folks around the world may not know, is that Trump won the presidency because he won the Electoral College, and that's another issue that we could talk about sometime. But the truth is he ended up getting almost 3 million votes fewer than did Secretary Clinton. In my view, having said that, there are a number of reasons why Trump ended up winning. And one of them is that while the economy in the United States under President Obama ended up after 8 years being a lot better than it was when Obama took office, the truth is that there were millions of working-class Americans, often in rural areas, who were left behind by the global economy and by a lack of training for the new high-tech jobs that are being created. For many of those people, unemployment is high, wages are low, health care is unavailable or simply too expensive, and these people worry desperately about what is going to happen to the lives of their children. For the last 40 years in the United States, the middle class of our country has been disappearing. More and more people are working longer and longer hours for lower wages, and 43 million Americans live in poverty. But I should mention to you what you already know, is that these problems are not unique to the United States. Globalization has left far too many people behind. Well, the wealthiest people on this planet, regardless of where they live, are doing phenomenally well, while at the same time, workers all over the world are seeing a decline in their standard of living. Unfettered free trade, for example, has allowed multinational corporations to enjoy huge profits and make the very rich even richer, while workers throughout the industrialized world have lost their jobs or been sucked into a race to the bottom as manufacturing facilities move to low-wage countries. Our job as part of the developed world is absolutely, from a moral sense, to do everything that we can to eradicate world poverty and the terrible oppression that poor people around the world are living in. But our challenge, which I believe we can achieve, is to accomplish that goal, bringing millions and millions of people out of poverty. We can do that without engaging in a race to the bottom and lowering the standard of living of working people in the developed countries. In the United States and throughout the entire developed world, trillions of dollars of corporate profits avoid taxation because of tax systems that allow the big money interests to transfer money at the click of a button to escape their tax obligations. Instead of paying their fair share of taxes, these multinational corporations hide their money in the Cayman Islands, in Luxembourg, Bermuda, and other tax havens. It is time for the world to come together and tell those, in some cases, extremely profitable corporations that, yes, they are going to start paying their fair share of taxes. Let me just give you one example. It is so blatant that if it wasn't so pathetic, it really would be laughable. And that is, in the Cayman Islands, there is one building, 4 or 5 story building, that is the home, quote unquote, home of some 15,000 corporations. 15,000 corporations in one modest-sized building. And all it is a post office address so that large multinational corporations, often from the United States, can put their profits in the Cayman Islands, not pay any taxes at all to the United States. And by the way, some of these corporations that make billions of dollars do not pay a nickel in federal income tax in the United States, and I suspect the story is the same in countries all over the world. And we're going to bring countries together to change that. It is time for these people to start owning up to what they have and pay their fair share. Further, as you all know, and again, I raise these issues. These are not American issues. They're not British issues. They're not German issues. These are international issues. All of you know that in the year 2008, 9 years ago, as a result of the incredible greed, recklessness, and illegal behavior of Wall Street, the United States and much of the world suffered the most serious economic collapse since the Great Depression of the 1930s. All over the world, millions of people lost their jobs, they lost their life savings, they lost their pensions, they lost their homes. It is not acceptable to me that today, despite all of that illegal activity, despite all of that greed, the 6 largest financial institutions in the United States, if you can believe it, have assets equivalent to 58% of the GDP of the United States. These financial institutions, again, this is an international issue, not just an American issue. These financial institutions, because of their incredible size, have enormous power, not just in the United States, but all over the world. They have caused massive harm in the past, and with their greed and with their power, they threaten the global economy today. It is time that we broke them up. Now, let me tell you for a moment about my greatest fear for the United States, but I suspect it is a fear that exists all over the world. And my fear is that for a number of years now, we have been moving rapidly in the direction of oligarchy, a system in which a small number of billionaires and corporate interests have increased control over our economic life, over our political life, and over the media, what we see, hear, and read. And while this has been going on for decades, there is no question but that this drift has accelerated rapidly under President Trump. And by the way, this movement toward oligarchy is not just an American issue. In the United States, we have the absurd situation where the top 1/10 of 1%, not 1%, 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Today, the top 1/10 of 1% now owns 22% of the wealth in America. Unbelievably, 20 Americans now own as much wealth as the bottom half of the people of the United States, over 150 million people. One family, the Walton family of Walmart, owns more wealth than the bottom 42% of the American people. And in America, as the middle class continues to decline, as many of our people are working 2, 3 jobs, 50, 60, 70 hours a week, since the year 2000, we have seen a 10-fold increase in the number of billionaires. So what we are seeing is a middle class which is disappearing. Right now in America, the worker, the male worker in the middle of American society is earning almost $1,400 less than he did in 1999. Middle class is shrinking, and yet almost all new income and wealth is going to the people on top. That's America. But it is not just America. This movement toward oligarchy is existing and accelerating all over the world. Globally, and this is again rather incredible, it's something that needs to be talked about and dealt with. Globally, the top 1%, the richest 1% on this planet, now owns more wealth than the bottom 99%. Today, the wealthiest 8 people own more wealth than the bottom half of the world's population, 3.7 billion people. In my view, this is an issue that is not talked about, but this is an issue that must be dealt with. Our job is to create an economy in our countries and around the world, economies that work for working people, economies that uplift the poor, not continue along a global economy which make the very, very richest people unbelievably rich while leaving almost everybody else behind. This is a global issue, and together we must address it. And for us in the United States, and this is different than it is here in the UK or other European countries, for us, when we talk about oligarchy and the power of the ruling class, it is not just economic, it is political as well. As a result of a disastrous Supreme Court decision in a case called Citizens United, the Supreme Court ruled that corporations and billionaires could spend as much money as they wanted, an endless supply of money on political campaigns. And what this means in practical terms is you have families like the Koch brothers, who are extreme right-wingers, who have spent many hundreds of millions of dollars to help elect candidates who represent the wealthy and the powerful. And what you're seeing in America today is people running for office who are themselves millionaires or billionaires, because often those are the only kinds of people who can spend the vast amounts of money you need to run, or you see other people who are beholden to the 1% because that's the place you get your campaign funding from. And one of the things that we did in our campaign for president that I am very proud of is we rejected the concept that the only way you can raise the kinds of money you need is from the wealthy and the powerful. We raised it from millions of working people with an average contribution of $27 apiece. But ultimately, and you are far ahead of us here in Europe. What we need to do is not allow this kind of huge expenditures for campaigns. We need in America to move toward public funding of elections. Take money out of politics. Now let me tell you a little bit about the book. And I think you'll find it interesting if you are interested in politics, and especially American politics. I decided to run for president after a whole lot of thought. And the essential reason that I ran was that I thought it was imperative for at least one candidate within the Democratic primary process to start talking about the most important issues facing working class, to talk about income and wealth inequality, to talk about the decline of the middle class, to talk about poverty, to talk about a broken criminal justice system, to talk about immigration reform, to talk about climate change, and many, many other issues which would not have been in a significant way discussed if a progressive did not enter that race. So what we did is when we began the campaign, you have to appreciate that we had almost no name recognition. I am the senator from the state of Vermont, a beautiful state, small state in the northeastern part of the country. And we love to see all of you visit us. And while obviously I was well known in my state, the truth is that I was not particularly well known around the rest of the country. We had very little money, and we had no national political organization. And we were taking on a candidate who had the support of the entire political establishment. In the United States Senate, there are 100 members. There were, at that point, a little over 46 Democratic members. I had the support of one Democratic senator. There are some 200 Democrats in the House, had the support of 6 of those people, had the support of no large city mayors, no governors at all. We were taking on the entire Democratic establishment. And to be honest with you, when we began, we did not have a clue about how to run for president. But what we learned, and it's an important lesson, what we learned is if you start speaking about the real issues that impact people's lives, people begin to listen. And as we traveled around the country, what we began to see is larger and larger turnouts, more and more people, working people and young people coming out to the rallies. And what the issues are that we talked about, and we go over this in the book, because what the book is not only describing a campaign, it is also describing my belief that if we're going to make progress in the United States politically, if the progressive movement is going to grow, the Democratic Party in the United States has to be fundamentally transformed. And that means it must become not a party of the liberal elite, but a party of the working class, a party of young people, a party which is prepared to take on the powerful special interests which today have so much power economically and politically. So the issues that we talked about was the need to fundamentally change an economy in which the rich get richer and most everybody else gets poorer. What does that mean in concrete terms? What it means for a start, and this is not a particularly radical idea, is that if you work 40 hours a week or 50 hours a week, you should not be living in poverty. And that means that in the United States, our federal minimum wage is all of $7.25 an hour. And that is a wage that nobody can possibly live on. During the campaign, we talked about the need to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. I am very proud that we managed to get in the Democratic platform language calling for $15 an hour. I'm even proud that just last week I introduced legislation with 30 co-sponsors in the Senate, I think 150 in the House, that says that in the United States of America, the minimum wage should be $15 an hour. And when we talk about wages, what we made clear in the campaign is that in the year 2017, it is not acceptable that women today are earning 79 cents on the dollar compared to men. It is not. It is not a radical idea in the year 2017 to say that we should pay equal pay for equal work, and we're going to do that. In the United States of America, and some of you who will visit our country will see it, unbelievably, our infrastructure is collapsing in a massive state of disrepair. That has to do with our roads, our bridges. Some of you may have heard about the water disaster in Flint, Michigan, where children were drinking poison water which had high levels of lead in it. And my wife, Jane, who is here someplace, and I worried. That's right. All right. And Jane and I will never forget going to Flint, Michigan, and holding a private meeting with parents and family members of children who had been poisoned. And what lead, as you know, in the water does is it impairs brain development. And we will never forget talking to a mother who described her kid, who was bright, gregarious, vivacious, and now is in special education because of the water that that little girl drank. And we heard that many, many times. But that problem is not unique to Flint, Michigan. It exists in many parts of this country. Our levees, our bridges, our wastewater plants are also in need of massive repair. My belief, whether it is Europe or in the United States, we don't need more austerity. We've had enough of that. We need to start investing in jobs for our people. And I'm proud to say that my call for a $1 trillion investment to rebuild our infrastructure in the U.S., which could create up to 13 million good-paying jobs, again, is now the position of the Democratic Party, and I hope that we can bring that about. Now, here is an issue that may seem a little bit strange to you. You have had, and I'm aware of the problems with the National Health Service, but you have had the NHS, I think, since '48. And yet in America, the wealthiest nation on earth, we remain the only industrialized country on earth that does not guarantee health care for all people. And what we said in the campaign, and it seems for you, this is a conservative idea, but you got to believe not so in America. The idea that we should have a health care system designed to provide quality health care to all people rather than huge profits for insurance companies and drug companies, in America, that was a radical concept. But it is gaining steam every single day. And what we are fighting for is what we call a Medicare for All single-payer program, which will guarantee health care to all of our people. Now, the absurdity of the American health care system is that we are spending about 2.5 times per capita of what you spend here in the United Kingdom. 2.5 times, but it is not clear that the health care outcomes in the United States are any better than they are here, and that is true in comparison between the United States and countries all over the world. So the fight now that we face in Congress is not only rejecting the Republican proposal passed last month, which threw 23 million people off of health insurance. The real fight that we have is to do what every other major country on earth does and say that health care, quality health care, is a right of all people, not a privilege. And here is another issue that we raised during the campaign. And again, for many of you, you're going to say, what's so radical about this? And it's not, because what I'm talking about exists in a number of countries around the world. All of you know that most of the good-paying jobs being created in the UK, Germany, in the United States require a higher education. 40 or 50 years ago in the United States, and I expect here as well, if you had what we call a high school degree, the likelihood is you can go out and find a pretty good job and make it into the middle class. By and large, those days are gone. There are exceptions, but by and large, those days are gone. Now, with changing technology, a changing global economy, young people need a much better education. So my view, which we raised during the campaign, I think for the first time nationally, is that we must make public colleges and universities tuition free. In a civilized democratic society, our job must be, one of the aspects of a democratic civilized society is to make sure that our people are as well educated as they possibly can be. It is insane that in America, young people today are going $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in debt in order to get a college degree. I will never forget, it's one of these things implanted in my brain. A couple of years ago, I had a meeting in my home city, Burlington, Vermont. And I talked to a young woman who had just graduated medical school. And in Vermont and in the nation, we have a significant shortage of doctors, especially primary care doctors, especially in rural areas. And I asked her, well, you went to medical school, what kind of debt did you incur? She said, $300,000. And then, some months later, I was in the state of Iowa, and I had mentioned that fact, and a young woman came up to me and she said, I just graduated dental school. And by the way, in the United States, we also have a shortage of dentists. And she said, I graduated $400,000 in debt. If you take a deep breath and just think about it for a moment, how insane is it that in the United States and in countries all over the world, we are telling young people that they're going to have to pay off debt year after year after year, sometimes for decades, for the crime of getting a good education. That is insane. That has got to change. And then when I brought forth that proposal, I was criticized. People say, well, Bernie, that is a very expensive proposal. You want to make public colleges and universities tuition free. You want to significantly lower student debt. That's going to cost about $70 billion a year. That's a lot of money. And the answer is, it is a lot of money. And we are going to pay for that by putting a speculation tax on Wall Street. The taxpayers of the United States bailed out the crooks on Wall Street. Now it is their time to repay that to the working class of this country. Now let me say a word on climate change again, especially on this day, when President Trump not only endangered the well-being of our people, but of people all over the world by telling the world that he was going to take the United States out of the Paris Agreement on climate change. We all know, because the scientists have been very, very clear on this, the debate is over. It's only in extreme right-wing circles where this debate continues. Climate change is real. Climate change is caused by human activity. And when you look at the acidification of the ocean and what that means to future generations, when you talk about the heat waves that Europe and India have already experienced, when you talk about rising sea levels threatening low-level countries around the world, when you talk about the fact that we're going to see more droughts and more extreme weather disturbances, and this becomes, by the way, not only an environmental issue, it becomes a national security issue. Because if people around the world cannot find land that they can grow their crops on, if they can't find clean drinking water, they are going to move. They are going to migrate. And when they migrate, they're going to be bumping into other people. And according to the United States' own CIA and Department of Defense, this will raise the level of conflict around the world, kind of the last thing we need. So what I want to tell you is that despite Trump's view that climate change is a hoax, despite Trump's desire to protect the interests of the fossil fuel industry, as I said earlier, all over my country, people are moving aggressively to transform our energy system, to take on the fossil fuel industry, who are much more concerned about their short-term profits than they are about the future of this planet. We are going to take them on with or without Donald Trump. And I want to touch on another issue. Again, it's an American issue. Some of you may be aware of it, some of you may not. The United States is the wealthiest country in the history of the world. And yet in America today, we have more people in jail than any other country on earth. China is a communist, authoritarian country that doesn't tolerate dissent all that well. It is 4 times larger in population than the United States. We have far more people in jail in America than does China. We have 2.2 million people in jail, disproportionately African American, Latino, and Native Americans. We are spending $80 billion a year to keep Americans in jail. In my view, and in the view of an increasing number of Americans, our job is to invest in our young people. There are communities in inner cities in America and in rural areas where youth unemployment is 20, 30, 40%. And kids are hanging out on street corners, and they're gravitating to drugs and other self-destructive activities. And it seems to me to make a heck of a lot more sense for us to be investing in jobs and education rather than jails or incarceration. So here is where we are as a nation, my nation, and as a world. We have extraordinary potential and great opportunities in front of us. if we use technology in a constructive way, we can cure diseases that are killing people today. We can make work much more pleasant. We can lower the number of hours that people are forced to work. We can, in fact, significantly address world poverty. There are studies out there which suggest that a $30 billion a year investment, not a whole lot of money from a global sense, would go a long way to ending hunger on this planet. Our job, and it is a tough job, but our job is to have the courage to stand up to the international billionaire class. Our job is to create an economy in the United States and in the UK and all over the world which meets the needs of the middle class and working families and lower income people, and not just an economy which makes the unbelievably rich even richer. That is our challenge. And if we do not allow demagogues to divide us up by the color of our skin or the country where we were born or our religion, if we stand together and not fall for that type of scapegoating which has done so much harm in my country and throughout the world, if we stand together and come forward with a progressive, humane agenda, we can transform this world. That it must be our goal, that must be our mission, and if we stand together, we in fact can accomplish that. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you.
A lot better. I've got quite a few questions that have been submitted, and I want to put some to you. And
Fire away.
Heard one shouted out halfway through, which relates to something we've asked, which was about why you didn't run as an independent. And it kind of links to this question, and it's from Chris Smith. Do you foresee the emergence of a third major party in the US? And a related question here, why do you feel it's so important to try to reform the Democratic Party?
That's a very fair question. Let me give you a little bit of history. I am the longest serving independent in the history of the United States Congress. Way back when, back in 1981, I became mayor of the city of Burlington, Vermont, the largest city in the state, as an independent, defeating a 5-term incumbent Democrat. And throughout my career, especially in the early parts, I would run against Democrats and Republicans. In recent years, the Democrats have been more supportive. The issue of a third party is that there are places in the United States where I think that may be possible. For example, in the state of Vermont, we have probably the strongest third party in the United States, the progressive third party, which has a number of seats in our state legislature. In other parts of the country, it's just not going to happen. The United States is not a parliamentary form of government, as you know, and it's winner take all. In my view, given the crisis of what Trump is doing in this country, my view is that it is best to try to fundamentally transform the Democratic Party. And that's what I have been doing by running all over this country. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that there is not opposition to that effort in the Democratic Party. I believe that we've got to make the Democratic Party a grassroots party, a party that moves from the bottom on up, a party which is not dependent on big money. There are people who disagree with me. But I think given the severe crisis that we face right now, where literally the future of the planet is at stake, that's kind of what I am trying to do.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to come to some climate change questions, but you say everyone wants to ask you about Donald Trump, and that is true, but we are on the home straight of a general election here It's become quite electrified in recent days. Some people, and I'm sure a lot of people here, compare Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, to you. He was a rank outsider. He was sneered at by the establishment. He has rallies all over the country and losing supporters. His team look to you. Would you say anything about him? Would you give him some advice? Would you endorse him?
Well, I am aware of what Corbyn not only is doing now, but what he has done for the last several years. And what has impressed me, and there is a real similarity between what he has done and what I have done, he has taken on the establishment of the Labour Party, and he has gone to the grassroots, and he has tried to transform that party and take on a lot of establishment opposition. That is exactly what is taking place in the United States and what I'm trying to do with the Democratic Party. And I am also impressed by his willingness to talk about class issues. Too many people run away from the grotesque levels of income and wealth inequality that exist in the United States, that exist in the UK, and exist all over the world. And I believe we will never make the kinds of changes that we need unless we take on this issue of income and wealth inequality and create an economy that works for all of us. Now, having said that, I don't think Jeremy Corbyn needs my advice. I think he's doing quite well, nor do I think the people of the UK need my advice on who to vote for. I think they understand it. But let me just say this. I have been very impressed by the work that Corbyn has done and the campaign that he is running, and I wish him the very best.
They like that. Although,
but that was not an endorsement.
Of course, you do talk very warmly of your brother, who is a Green politician in this country. And we are sitting in a Green seat constituency right now. Right. Can I just put this question to you from Russell Miller, who's the father of Charlotte, who lives in Vermont and has a picture of you with your arm around her. And I just kind of love this question. The co-author of Donald Trump's book, The Art of the Deal, said during the campaign that there was a very good chance, if he made it to the White House, that it would result in the end of existence. It hasn't happened yet, but do you think there is any point making plans for Christmas? And a related question from Melanie Anning. Are the Democrats doing enough now to win big in the midterms?
Okay, good questions. Yes, I think the planet will probably survive to Christmas. But I do know where that question is coming from. But let me just take it a little bit deeper when you talk about Trump. Just a few things that I didn't quite get into. Trump is a reflection of a part of the greed of the 1%, which exists all over the world. Not only does he lie all of the time, but I found really fascinating, in his business career, he was sued or involved in lawsuits over 2,500 times. What does that mean? Now, big businessman, people get sued all the time, but not 2,500 or maybe even 3,000 times. What does it mean? What it means is his attitude is he's going to sign a contract with you, you're going to work for him, but he has no intention of honoring that contract. And that type of dishonesty and that type of greed and that type of mentality that my word doesn't mean anything, that I sign an agreement with you, but I can rescind that and take you to court, and I have big-powered lawyers who will defeat you. That type of mentality is what is destroying the middle class of my country and doing terrible harm all over the world. So when you talk about the Democratic Party, what we are trying to do and what must happen here in the UK, in Europe, all over this world, is people must be involved in the political process in an unprecedented way, in whatever way you think is effective. Now, one of the results of my campaign, and I'm so proud of this, and it's such a beautiful thing. I go around the country and I see somebody said, hey, Bernie, I ran for school board in a small town, and I won. I ran for city council, met a young man in Montana just a few weeks ago, ran for the state legislature and won. And we're seeing dozens and dozens of those people being involved. But it is not just running for office or supporting candidates who run for office. That is enormously important. The truth, the most important truth of a democratic society is that all of you and all of us have extraordinary power if we choose to exercise that power. All right? You know, I mean, I can give you a myriad of examples. I mean, we have, if you're a young person at a university, and your university has an endowment, and we're seeing this all over America, and this endowment is investing in the fossil fuel industry, where we're seeing colleges all over America saying, sorry, we want you to take your money out of the fossil fuel industry. We are seeing people standing up demanding that their local governments move in a direction which will create sustainable energy and energy efficiency. In my own city of Burlington, since 1989, we have seen a 4% drop in the amount of electricity we consume as a city. If you did that all over America, it would be a massive drop in coal production and in coal-produced electricity. So in a million ways, whatever it may be, at the local level, at your broader level, at your national level, people have got to rethink their participation in the democratic process. I mean, the simple truth is that real change in America, and I suspect all over the world, has never, ever taken place from the top on down. It has always been from the bottom on up. And you all know that the history of the UK is different than the history of the United States. And way back when, you know, people don't know this. 100 years ago today, in the United States of America, women did not have the right to vote. Women did, in many cases, not have the opportunity to get a higher education or do the jobs that they wanted. But women and their male allies by the millions stood up, fought back, and ended the second-class citizenship for women. Civil rights movement in America, as you all know, and it started way before the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Millions of people, again, mostly African Americans and their white allies, stood up and fought back. The gay movement, 30 years ago, 25 years ago in America, gay people were ashamed, afraid to come out with their sexual identity. And yet, a few years ago, a conservative Supreme Court voted that gay marriage should be legal in every state in the United States of America. Right now, when I introduced the bill for a $15 an hour minimum wage, the reason we were able to do that is we had low-wage workers, workers in the fast food industry, workers in McDonald's and Burger King and those places. They went out on strike. They stood up. They demonstrated. They created a consciousness in America that said $7.25 an hour is a starvation wage, and that we've got to move it up to a living wage, which is $15 an hour. So the point that I am making is we have in America made significant progress in a number of areas. America has its problems with race, no ifs, buts, and maybes, but we are a much less racist society today than we were 50 years ago. We've made progress in women's rights. And by the way, we are going to continue the fight to make sure that women control their bodies and not the government. And we've made significant progress in gay rights. But the area, a very, very important area, where not only are we not making progress, we're losing ground, is the economic struggle. And again, I'm going to have to, in America I get criticized because I talk about this all of the time. But there is nothing right about so few having so much and so many having so little. And our struggle is to bring people together to create a new type of economy. And I hope you will work with us to make that happen.
So, one thing I was really interested in the book was during the campaign against Hillary Clinton, you talked about polling of yourself against Donald Trump. And you were polling very well at that point, and she wasn't. Do you believe you could have beaten him?
You know, but you didn't have a vote, you know.
Some of them might have.
The answer is, who knows? You know, and I'm not, I am not looking backwards. We got to kind of, you know, look forwards, and we're dealing with Trump every single day. But what it was true is that there were a number of polls fairly consistently which had me defeating Trump by bigger numbers than she was. In fact, it was just a poll that came out, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, which had me beating Trump today by about 13 points, I think was the case.
So yes, maybe.
Maybe.
and I think it's really interesting. We are in the middle of an election. We have a system here where a proportional vote doesn't always translate. And there's a question here from Peter Engelson on that. Could I ask, under the Electoral College system, Hillary lost the election last year despite winning the popular vote. Why is this allowed to happen, and how can it be changed?
That's a very fair question, because it would be hard for me, or I think anyone, to defend a system where the candidate who got 3 million votes less than the other candidate became president of the United States. So without going into great detail, that is an issue. I mean, it's indefensible, bottom line is. And I happen to believe that majority should win. If you get more votes than the other guy, you should win. And that is not the case in the United States. So without going into great detail, yes, that has got to be changed.
And it's just on that, is one of the ways you change that by changing the number of delegates you have in certain states? I mean, is there a... No, you can't do that. It becomes a more it's a constitutional issue that has to be dealt with in a constitutional way, I think. Okay. I don't have much time, but a couple more quick ones that I just want to ask you. This is from Rosemary, who says, I woke up on June the 24th last year. Is that a date that means anything to you? I'll remind you what it is in a minute. It was the day that we woke up to Brexit here, feeling as though I didn't really recognise my country. Did you feel the same on the 9th of November, or did you see the result coming? And I suppose I can throw in there, how did you feel about Brexit?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good question, because I think there's a commonality in both of those issues. I think, I'm not an expert on this, but you know, off the top of my head, what I think Brexit was about was a lot of people who felt left behind by the global economy, who felt that their voices and their pain was not being heard. You could take it to France, where Le Pen did very, very well in a lot of the rural areas, as did Trump in America. And one of the things that is not widely appreciated, only go to Trump in America, which, you know, again, has a correlation with Brexit, is what is not widely perceived. You know, when people think about America, they think, well, it's a pretty wealthy country. What you don't know is there are areas of America, there are towns in America which once had factories and unions, and workers were earning a living wage. There were once towns in America where you had good schools and that people were proud of their communities. You can drive around areas of America right now where small towns are desolate. Their main streets are boarded up because the stores have shut down. Let me tell you something else that you probably don't know. There are many, many communities around America, in states like West Virginia, in states like Kentucky, and many others, where life expectancy, how long you live, is actually going down. For the first time in the modern history of the United States, we are seeing large numbers of people, often white working class people, having a lower life expectancy than their parents. What history is a bit about is that you live longer than your parents, who live longer than their parents. That is being changed. So you're seeing people living in incredible despair. The jobs they have, if they're lucky enough to have a job, pay starvation wages. They see no future for their kids, and they are turning to drugs. Some of you may know this, some of you may not. But in America now, we have a horrific, in my state, all over this country, opioid addiction crisis. We have a heroin crisis, and many people are dying from drug overdoses. They are dying from alcoholism, and they're dying incredibly from suicide. So there is a lot of despair. And the more the despair, the better Donald Trump did. All right? And what upset me very much is that the Democratic Party more or less ignored that reality, forfeited. We have 50 states in the country, and the Electoral College is about 50 states. Right now, it's not just the White House. Many people around the world are focusing on the White House. You all know that the U.S. House, controlled by Republicans, U.S. Senate, controlled by Republicans. You may not know that almost 2/3 of the states in America have Republican governors, and you probably don't know that in the last 9 years, the Democrats have lost close to 1,000 seats in state houses and state assemblies and state senates in the last 9 years. So what the Democrats have got to do is to have the courage to look at that despair, to look at that pain, to look at the youth unemployment, to look at the mom, the single mom. Do you know what it costs child care in the United States of America? If you are a working mom, let's say you're a single mom, you got to go to work, and you're making $30,000, $40,000 a year, it will cost you in most communities around America at least $10,000 for decent quality child care. Now, how do you pay $10,000 when you're making $30,000 or $40,000? How do you afford college for your kids? There are millions and millions of people in America who are paying 40 or even 50% of their limited incomes for housing, just to put a roof over their heads. Half of the older workers in America, people who are 60, 62, who are entering retirement, you know how much money they have in the bank saving up for retirement? They have zero. If your car breaks down, it becomes a disaster. Somebody gets sick. We don't have a national health care system. If you get sick and you end up in the hospital, you can end up $50,000, $60,000 in debt. You don't have any money, you're going to go bankrupt. This is the reality that is facing many, many millions of people in our country. It is not widely known. Trump understood that. And Trump spoke to that reality. Unfortunately, he lied in terms of what he would do for those people. But that reality exists. And what I am trying to do, along with many others, is to make the Democratic Party the party of those people, stand up for them, and in fact have the courage to take on the greed of the billionaire class. That is what we have got to do. So what I often say about Trump is it wasn't so much that Trump won the election. Trump was the least popular candidate for president in the history of the United States. It wasn't that he won the election, it was that the Democrats lost the election. And our job is to transform that party.
We're just about to run out of time, but I need to put a question on climate change to you. Good. Because as we've been sitting here, America is, we now know, going to pull out of the Paris Agreement, which is totally shocking to people in this country. We have a question here from Robin Daglish, which is another totally shocking thing. He says there are 180 members of Congress who deny the science behind climate change and have received more than $82 million from fossil fuel industries. What can we do about this?
The question is right on. It is, I have to tell you, being here in the UK, this is, to me, just an international embarrassment. And I want you to think about it. How do you run a government? How do you make public policy if you don't make it based on science? And we have a president who does not believe in science. We have a president who is a representative of the fossil fuel industry. How can we deal with it? And you're right. And then this ties into the issue of campaign finance in America. And again, this is an issue, as I mentioned during my remarks, that has to be dealt with. Right now, if you moved to America and you became an American citizen and you wanted to run for office, if you wanted to run from the United States Senate from a modest-sized state, not the biggest, not California, not the smallest, you'd probably have to raise $50, $60, $70 million to do that. That's true. What we have now is you have to raise money, but no matter how much money you raise, we have a handful of billionaires who have unlimited amounts of money. So you raise $50 or $70 million. They would simply themselves, as an independent expenditure, above and beyond the campaign, throw in as much money as necessary in terms of ugly 30-second ads. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Montana, a very small, beautiful state, and I supported a guy who was running statewide. There's one congressman from Montana, so it's a whole statewide election. A wonderful guy, and he ran a really, really great campaign. He ended up losing by 6 points to a right-wing Republican. Turns out that he was outspent 10-to-1 in terms of independent expenditures. He raised a good deal of money himself, but his name is Rob Quist, and he was outspent 10-to-1 in terms of independent expenditure. So what does it mean? It means, and this is tough stuff, it means that we've got to overturn the Citizens United Supreme Court decision. It means that we have to move toward a system similar to what you have here, or maybe in Germany, whatever it may be, which is public funding of elections. And that means that if I raise a lot of money from small contributions, government chips in maybe $5 for every dollar I raise. Point being, what democracy is supposed to mean is one person, one vote, not billionaires buying elections, and that is exactly what we have in the United States. It impacts the debate over climate change, because the fossil fuel industry is extremely powerful. It impacts the debate over health care, because the drug companies and the insurance companies are enormously powerful. One other example, in terms of prescription drugs. You and I can have the same illness and buy the same prescription drugs. Here in the UK, you could pay 40, 50, 60% less than we pay in the United States, because your National Health Service negotiates prices with the drug companies. In America, we don't, because of the power of the drug companies and the insurance companies. So this issue of money in politics is maybe the most important issue, because it impacts everything else. It has got to be dealt with, no question about it.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time, and I have to tell everyone here, if you haven't read this, you should read it, because it makes that argument in a way that has completely shocked me. I couldn't believe to read about the £80 billion family who essentially want to rip up Medicare and rip up welfare benefits, and I just think, and you can buy it outside as well. It's totally inspiring. All I can say from the Brighton Festival, thank you so much for coming here and being with us. Bernie Sanders.
Thank you very much.